Possibly the most iconic symbol of Doctor Who is the TARDIS, a magnificent time and space machine squeezed into an inconspicuous 1960s police box. It is so iconic that it has essentially completely overshadowed the very thing it was based on in the first place. The popularity of the TARDIS cannot be overstated, and one of the many Doctor Who fans enamoured with it was Neil Gaiman, acclaimed writer of Good Omens, American Gods and Coraline amongst many others. Gaiman wanted to focus on the TARDIS itself for his Doctor Who debut in Series 5, turning the time machine into a dangerous maze for Amy Pond. However, due to budget reasons, this story was pushed back to Series 6 and became The Doctor's Wife, where the TARDIS becomes a living, breathing woman at the hands of a sentient asteroid. It's safe to say The Doctor's Wife is one of the most popular and beloved episodes of the 11th Doctor era, even winning 2 awards for dramatic presentation. But 11 years later, does it still hold up to the acclaim, or is it more patchwork than perfection?
She's a woman, and she's the TARDIS.
Did you wish really hard?
Whilst hanging out in the TARDIS with Amy and Rory, the Doctor receives a Time Lord cube, a nice homage to one of Gaiman's favourite stories, The War Games, which introduced the concept of an emergency messaging system for the Time Lords, although this one is definitely higher budget. This setup is really strong, using the Doctor's guilt and loneliness to lure him in with the promise of another Time Lord. Remember, this is after the Time War. To the Doctor's knowledge, every single member of his species is dead, and he has had to live with that. Even when he did encounter another survivor, it was his greatest enemy, the Master.
I'm begging you, everything's changed! It's only the two of us, we're the only ones left!
It's nice then that the Corsair is set up as an actually decent Time Lord, perfectly tricking both the Doctor and the audience into getting their hopes up that there's another survivor out there. Gaiman also slips in a reference to cross-gender regeneration, which to my knowledge is one of the first indications in the show that you can actually change between sexes. It's implied that the reason the Doctor is so desperate for another survivor isn't necessarily because he wants to be reunited with them, it's because he wants forgiveness for his actions during the Time War, which, you know, included destroying the entire race. So he's definitely not on the Christmas card list anymore. Throughout the revived era of Doctor Who, the Doctor's guilt is established time and time again, constantly reminding the viewer of the burden he carries. We know why he did it, but that doesn't stop him feeling guilty for being driven to such an extreme point of throwing away all that defines him. Therefore, him having this opportunity to rationalise himself to other Time Lords further shows how easily he's fallen into the trap. He's so desperate to be able to sleep at night that he'll take any chance for forgiveness, which is a fascinating character motivation.
Doctor, listen to me, don't get emotional because that's when you make mistakes.
The search for the Corsair takes the Doctor to the sentient asteroid known as House, a vast spaceship graveyard. I love the setting and the aesthetic of this episode. It's like a dark fairy tale, feeling very Tim Burton-esque with the costumes and the set design. It is very patchwork, this jumbled mess of random space debris and junk that's fallen through a rift in time. Even the characters are patchwork.
Patchwork, people. We've been repaired and patched up so often I doubt there's anything left of what used to be you.
Auntie, Uncle and Idris are fascinating because of the implication they're the latest in a long line of tools for House to play with. He's used so many bodies to destroy TARDISes, which suggests a wider family of captives that have all been burned up one by one until we're left with these 4 in a desolate wasteland. It's a really interesting setting we hadn't really explored before in the modern era. Sure, it's just a Welsh quarry as always, but all the little details and colours add a very atmospheric feel to the whole thing. Even the corridors look great, filled with clutter and lights peeking through. There's something so desolate and unsettling about it even from the very beginning, especially when House talks through Auntie and Uncle. Their faces are so lifeless and Michael Sheen's voice is so immediately sinister. He's such a good part of this episode, this deep and unnerving disembodied voice serving as the real climactic threat. A brilliant adversary for the Doctor. When the Doctor hears Time Lords calling for help somewhere on the asteroid, the camera spins around him, perfectly communicating the disorientation he's experiencing. Shots like these highlight Richard Clarke's exceptional direction. They're compiled in such a visually engaging way, whilst also giving the viewer plenty of information about what the characters are feeling and the emotions they're experiencing at any given time. Similarly, the acting is incredible, like when the Doctor finally discovers that the Time Lord voices are coming from a room full of hypercubes. There's such a feeling of dread, and it's like the Doctor and the viewer have been punched in the gut. Matt Smith perfectly emotes his anguish and feeling of betrayal. He had been so hopeful to see his people again, only to find out that they were also lured here just like him. Gaiman knows the Doctor isn't stupid, so he instantly works out what has been going on in a brilliant moment of anger.
You gave me hope and then you took it away. That's enough. to make anyone dangerous.
In Series 5, the 11th Doctor wasn't given as much of the darkness and anger of the 10th Doctor, but when Smith delivers lines like these, it perfectly communicates the absolute fury bubbling underneath the character. It takes something huge to elicit such a response from the character, so when he snaps, you know it's incredibly serious. And in addition to that, visually he's covered in shadows, which is such a great way of showing his intense dark emotions. In order to enact his grand scheme of stealing the TARDIS and killing the Doctor, House puts the spirit and matrix of the time and space machine into a woman called Idris, whose first meeting with the Doctor is perfectly snappy and chaotic. It reminds me a lot of post-regeneration madness, which is always fun to see, but it's definitely surreal here because we've only ever seen the Doctor doing this. And the best part is, none of her lines are wasted here. She immediately hints at being the TARDIS by accusing the Doctor of stealing her and establishing their flirty relationship. She drops clues for Amy and Rory later on in the story, and she also mentions the cubes that will make the Doctor angry. Every line in this exchange is important and serves a purpose to the wider story, setting a lot of plot points up in a dynamic way only a writer like Gaiman could pull off. Idris is a good mystery throughout the first 15 minutes of the story. She acts eccentric and quirky along with seeing into the future by knowing what people will say before they do. Another good hint towards her true nature as the TARDIS, which, you know, is a time machine. After finding out about the trap he's in, the Doctor confronts Idris to find out where she fits into all of this. The scene is brilliant and I adore the moment of realization as he works out she is actually the TARDIS, because she remembers absolutely everything. She has knowledge of their shared history that only the TARDIS could possibly have. And I know it's the typical Moffat era quirk I'd usually criticise, but I really enjoy the idea that it was a two-way theft. The box stole the Doctor too. It's been stated multiple times that TARDISes are more than simple machines. They're actually intelligent living entities. Therefore, it makes sense that the Doctor's one wanted to see the universe. Even before this episode, the Doctor and the TARDIS had such a close and personal relationship, so I think it's a nice, if a bit self-indulgent reveal that they stole each other. The episode heavily explores this relationship. By humanising the TARDIS in the form of Idris, we get to properly see their bond in a light we can easily understand and relate to. They're essentially an old married couple, and the episode takes that literally, given the title, which gives them a fun dynamic. It even gets quite meta with loads of small things fans have always thought about and wondered for years.
You didn't always take me where I wanted to go.
No, but I always took you where you needed to go.
The TARDIS being faulty was never just a coincidence because it always led to the Doctor saving people and protecting the universe. Things like these prove the episode takes full advantage of humanising the TARDIS by giving it a voice. After all, it has always been the second longest serving character in the entire show. Although this whole episode makes me wonder what the TARDIS thought about the Davis era mallet. Naughty girl. The events of the Doctor's wife take place outside of our universe, which is a really cool concept and requires the Doctor to push the boundaries of the TARDIS. It turns out it's not exactly easy to break into entire other universes, so it makes sense that the TARDIS will be drained of its energy. Limiting or threatening the time and space machine itself is always a really good way to introduce high stakes to a story, whilst also forcing the protagonist to engage with the events. The TARDIS is the safest place in the show, which is once again hammered home as the Doctor sends Amy and Rory back there to protect them. It's similar to Rose in Parting of the Ways. He knows this situation is too dangerous even for his companions, but he also knows that they're so loyal they would never willingly leave him to face such danger on his own, so he has to manipulate them for their own good. There's nowhere safer for them to be, but the Doctor's wife changes that completely. Not only does it cripple the TARDIS, it also sprinkles in intensity and danger by making it a core setting, seeing Amy and Rory trapped in the infinite vastness with a psychopathic god. Well, actually that's just normal Doctor Who. There's a fantastic moment of panic as the Doctor realises just how much danger he's actually put Amy and Rory in by sending them back to the TARDIS, which has now gone completely dark. The music swells and the cloister bells chime, which is always an immediate way of signalling danger. It has long been established that the cloister bells are pretty much the worst possible sound for the TARDIS to make, so it's a familiar yet impactful sound that sends instant fear and dread into the hearts and souls of longtime fans because of what it represents. Amy and Rory are completely trapped inside, Matt Smith doing an incredible job as the Doctor desperately tries to get back in. He's completely helpless for once. Nothing he does works and his frustration is brilliantly shown, especially as the TARDIS dematerialises in front of him, leaving him utterly trapped and stranded. This is usually a character who can always think of a solution. There's always a way out. But this time the Doctor has been so blindsided and caught off guard that even he doesn't have any plans this time. It's rare to see the character so helpless.
I really don't know what to do.
Amy and Rory being trapped in the TARDIS by House kind of reminds me of Saw. He's this ominous, faceless entity who wants to use them for his own entertainment instead of immediately killing them, so he forces them to run around like mice in a maze. It's such a chilling use of House as an entity, completely perverting the safest place in the show and turning it into a living nightmare. Not only is it bathed in this eerie green lighting, but Amy and Rory also now have to deal with this complete psychopath toying with them. It's such a good secondary narrative, characterising House, developing the antagonist and the stakes, complementing the main story rather than distracting from it. House loves to eat TARDISes. Vortex manipulators are probably his midnight snacks. Since the Doctor's TARDIS is the last, House has to go to our universe in search of more, which means he has no need for Auntie and Uncle.
I don't want to play with you anymore.
I think it's quite sinister how quickly he discards these two characters. It shows how cold and ruthless he really is. He was only ever using them and they just gave him entertainment.
That's what Auntie and Uncle were for, wasn't it? Someone to make suffer.
He doesn't even take the time to consider their right to live, so he just discards them, and that's a horrifying concept. A brilliant way to further characterise this absolutely evil and vile antagonist. This also means that Idris is dying, especially because you can't put a TARDIS inside a human body. God, it's like Donna all over again. It's very fitting that this episode about TARDISes takes place in a junkyard. After all, that's how it all began. Rather ironically, House's appetite for the time and space machines provides the Doctor with the perfect means for escape, because he can channel his inner scrap heap challenge and Frankenstein together a temporary TARDIS from the wreckage of others. It's a clever use of the setting and premise of House luring Time Lords to their deaths, because if you're killing Time Lords, you'll have a few TARDISes knocking about somewhere, because what are you going to do, throw them away? Hatching this scheme against all odds also speaks to the determination of the Doctor. He doesn't care if it's theoretically impossible to pull this off, because his friends are in danger and that's what matters most. The idea of building a TARDIS has always been a popular and interesting one. I'm sure we'd all love to pop down to Space IKEA and pick up a flat pack time machine. It's actually been established before that you grow a TARDIS instead of building it, because it's a living being. This growth concept was originally going to be in Journey's End, seeing the Doctor give Rose and the Metacrisis Doctor the ability to grow their own time and space machine to continue their adventures. Luckily, that never happened, but this episode takes a more literal approach to the concept of assembling a TARDIS. This literal building approach just works better visually, because it gives the Doctor and Idris a clear goal and sense of progression as they slowly cobble together these mismatched pieces of walls and random components.
You're like a 9-year-old trying to rebuild a motorbike in his bedroom, and you never read the instructions.
The makeshift console room looks great, already miles better than the one in Battlefield. There's always a danger of over-conceptualizing and over-complicating something like this, but the Doctor's wife handles the idea perfectly, especially notable because it was designed by a child in a Blue Peter competition. Because, you know, this episode literally comes in and says, here's one I made earlier. The design keeps things simple, sacrificing the bigger on the inside aspect for a basic wall and a console, so it feels realistically advanced while still looking fragile and makeshift enough to suit the narrative. If you're like me and most other fans, the idea of seeing more of the TARDIS is always a tantalising prospect. The console room itself tends to be nice, but it's also nice to explore more, and the Doctor's wife gives us at least a little bit of this. Despite Gaiman's grand plans for lots of interesting sequences, the budget can allow for pretty much any of his ideas, so instead the episode just sticks to generic corridors. An interesting thing it does do though is play with anti-gravity. House turning off the safeguards to transform the endless corridors into multi-leveled mazes, complete with bottomless pits and death traps. I appreciate the verticality because this is an impossible box of limitless proportions. It wouldn't just stretch out into horizontal space. House continues his games by separating the pair of companions, forcing Amy to discover Rory as an old man. So much of their relationship is defined by waiting, so zeroing in on this aspect is such a good way for House to torture them both. The episode suddenly becomes like a psychological horror, and it gets genuinely unsettling because of the set design and the brilliant directing. House has complete control over everything, and he can do whatever he wants to them. One of the creepiest parts of this episode is Nephew stealing Rory's voice. This is an absolutely terrifying concept. There are so many chilling tales of creatures stealing the voices of loved ones to lure you to your death. It is an ancient fear that has become genuinely deeply ingrained within our very nature. So when you have the Ood, creatures with translation spheres, it's the perfect way to incorporate such a fear, especially because Planet of the Ood showed that the aliens can use different voice patterns, so it makes sense that they'd be able to replicate someone else's voice.
And how are you, Ood? All the better for seeing you.
Whilst flying their rickety DIY TARDIS, the Doctor and Idris direct Amy and Rory into the old control room, which leads to a moment that will always give me nostalgic goosebumps. Like, come on. Imagine being a starry-eyed kid growing up with this console room for 5 years and then getting to see it again even if it's just for a brief cameo. It's like being reunited with an old friend, and this scene will always be special to me. It's also a fun gimmick to see an incarnation of the Doctor in the wrong console room. Obviously we get snippets of that concept after Regeneration, but there's just something so exciting and surreal about proper moments like these. The Coral TARDIS looks absolutely phenomenal here. It's bathed in that eerie green light, and the improvements in camera quality add a lot of style to it. It looks better than it had even in the 2009 specials, coming across as higher budget and more modern. So I'm glad they managed to make one of my favourite interiors look so incredible, especially because they held the entire set just for this story because it was going to be in Series 5. I also like the idea that the TARDIS simply archives desktops, so old console rooms are never truly gone, along with Idris implying she already has future console rooms ready because she can see into the future to an extent. The science around the changes in console rooms has never really been explored, but I appreciate that this episode explains that they can always come back if the situation calls for it. Obviously the budget and lack of sets makes it impossible to actually bring them back, but I simply love the idea that the TARDIS could just conjure up the TV movie interior at any point, regardless of which incarnation of the Doctor is inside. At the expense of Nephew the Ood, the Doctor and Idris finally reunite with Amy and Rory, tying the two main storylines together in a smooth and satisfying way. However, House is still a significant threat, since he could kill the protagonist in any way he chooses, because he's just that powerful. He's almost spoiled for choice, and that's his mistake essentially. He's overconfident and completely underestimates the Doctor, which, you know, is something villains really need to stop doing. The Doctor is dangerous anyway, but especially when you've angered them and backed them into a corner. House found it easy to trick and kill Time Lords before, so he expected the Doctor to be another easy victim. But he's more than just another Time Lord. He's the Doctor, the biggest Time Lord slayer in the entire universe.
Fear me, I've killed hundreds of Time Lords.
Fear me, I've killed all of them.
This is such a chilling and powerful moment, one of the best exchanges in the entire Smith era, because it blindsides you with a reminder of how much blood the Doctor has on his hands. He feels that intense guilt for his actions, but he also knows how dangerous it makes him. House may be big, bad and constantly making threats, but the Doctor feels nothing because he himself has inflicted even more damage and is always capable of further destruction on top of that. He's easily more dangerous than House. He just knows how to hold himself back by living with morals and a code of ethics, preventing him from becoming an evil maniac like House. However, because he's an evil maniac with unlimited power, House makes mistakes. First, he gets too cocky and tries to delete the coral interior with the protagonist inside, betraying the Doctor who had tried to make a deal with him. House clearly thinks he's being slick, but this is actually exactly what the Doctor wanted because it puts them back into the main console room. I think it's satisfying that House's downfall comes from his overconfidence. Having all that power would easily go to your head, and the Doctor knows that. So he plays into the ego, giving House what he wanted, only to completely turn things around in a genius way. Funnily enough, House's biggest and most costly mistake was the first thing we saw him do, putting the TARDIS inside Idris. He did it to get the Matrix out of the way so the TARDIS could die within her body without destroying the universe or causing him any issues. However, once Idris is back in the main console room and the physical body dies, the TARDIS Matrix can return to where it belongs and destroy House to save the day. This is such a clever plan, firmly underlining the Doctor's sheer intelligence and tactical genius. Idris has been there the whole time, and House was too distracted playing games to remember what she really was, so his treatment of others comes back to bite him in a big way. We then get the scene that's the beautiful highlight of the whole episode.
But this is when we talked, and now even that has come to an end.
It's such a sad goodbye, reminding you of the limited relationship between the Doctor and the TARDIS. They have such a tight and deep bond, a real understanding of one another, but they can never communicate properly. They can't talk one-on-one with both understanding each other. However, the transference into Idris gave them that ability for a precious, yet heartbreakingly brief period of time. Once again, the Doctor was given hope just for it to be yanked away. Sure, the TARDIS itself isn't going anywhere and he'll always have it, but not like this. He was finally given this ability and chance to talk properly to his constant companion, but now that's been taken away from him and he's alone again. It's hard not to feel the Doctor's sadness during this tragic and bittersweet moment. He can't easily go back to the way things were before after being given this chance to talk, because the Doctor now knows what he's lost, what he misses. he'll never be able to recapture that feeling or that level of shared understanding. They can still communicate in some form though, which completes the bittersweet ending. The Doctor and the TARDIS have had a connection for all those centuries and it will never go away. Sure, her human body has died and they can no longer talk properly, but that connection and that bond will always remain, and I think that's just a nice note to end it on. Although they do also insist on including a vague riddle.
The only water in the forest is the river?
Oh yeah, because that's definitely not going to be important. Every now and then, an episode of Doctor Who comes along and just completely blows you away. The Doctor's Wife is definitely one of those episodes. A truly incredible story on every level. The effects like the regeneration energy and space travel are both absolutely gorgeous and the directing is sublime. Clarke's direction always communicates the emotions and feelings of the narrative, along with simply making the episode look fantastic. On a writing level, Gaiman absolutely nails it, feeling like an episode full of references for Die Hard fans without alienating the casual viewer. The dialogue is fun and snappy with memorable lines and moments, along with the script being smooth and enjoyable. It doesn't waste its small but well utilised cast. Amy and Rory get their side story inside the TARDIS, which adds an expansive dimension to the time machine, and the idea of the TARDIS itself becoming a proper character is perfectly executed. The Doctor and Idris have incredible chemistry. Matt Smith and Serene Jones are a fantastic pairing anchoring the episode without it ever feeling too gimmicky. The whole concept of the episode is brilliant. Such a creative way to build upon the Time Lord backstory in a way we haven't seen before, and using the Time Lords themselves is a good hook. When it comes to the Series 6 tier list, The Doctor's Wife easily earns an S rank. It could have even been a series finale because it's that high stakes with a sinister villain in-house, who is an exceptional antagonist with endless power. The setting itself is imaginative and brought to life wonderfully, so the whole episode comes together absolutely magnificently for an incredible experience. And I'd like to give an extra special thank you to all my Diamond level patrons, Daniel Shillito, Fallon Cortez and Nissa Phillips, and my Platinum level patron Mark Hippold Guy Taylor, and all my Gold level patrons, Alex Marston, Basil Disco PhD, Calvin, Francois AK Line Vortex, Herna Verzog, Luke_SY, and Stephen Never Miller. Thank you so much for your support.